And speaking of absurdity, I'm delighted to welcome two outsiders. And now, a couple of years ago, people on Twitter were astonished by a young lady called Titania McGrath, who was busily spouting the wokest and most absurd left-wing drivel that you've ever heard. And people looked at this and thought, is this person for real? And it took a couple of years, but no, Titania wasn't for real. She was, in fact, Andrew Doyle, who joins us now. Andrew, so great to have you on the show.
It's my pleasure.
Now, you've got some big fans here. You've got some huge fans here who've followed you on Twitter for a long time. Now, just tell us briefly the story of your alter ego. You've got a book coming out soon, so please tell us about that as well. But just take us through the journey of Andrew and Titania.
Well, I'm a stand-up comedian and writer based in London, and about a year and a half ago I got to the point where I was just so sick of this kind of very intolerant brand of social justice activism that was completely unresponsive to any form of argument or discussion. So I thought the best way to deal with that was to poke fun at it through a satirical character, and I thought the best way to do that would be to create a character that sort of embodies their worst excesses. And so I just did it on Twitter, to be honest, and it was just to entertain myself more than anything. And I thought she could be a slam poet as well. She's sort of Titania McGrath, she's very kind of radical, intersectionalist, feminist, ecosexual, which means she only has sex with plant life, very kind of extreme in her views. And I thought as well, make her a slam poet, you know, because she thinks she can save the world through her awful poetry. And I thought that'd be quite fun to do. So I did that, and I created the character, and then people started taking her seriously, and I think that's what helped the account to grow, is that people... I always tried to signal the things that she was saying that they were absurd enough so that the people who were switched on would see that it wasn't real. You know, so she would say things like, the only way we can defeat fascism is if we empower the state to lock us up if we say the wrong thing, and stuff like that. So that it's obviously, you know, she's obviously not real. But you'd be surprised how many take it seriously. And I think the reason they do is because it's not a million miles away of what people are actually saying, to be fair. So I don't blame people altogether for not seeing that. And then it got to a point where I thought I'd write a book as her, and I wrote the book. And she'd been banned a few times from Twitter, and then she got a permanent suspension, which was, I think, in September time. And there was a backlash against that, and they reinstated her. But off the back of that, of course, because of the Streisand effect, whenever you try and censor something, it draws a lot of attention to it. And as a result of that, people sort of found out about her more, and it's just sort of snowballed from there, really.
Rita?
Well, it is becoming harder, Andrew, to determine what is parody and what is real. And I think that's what Titania does so beautifully, because she just straddles that line, and you're never quite sure. And you've... yourself, a lot of people say you're, you know, right-wing and alt-right adjacent and a Nazi and all sorts of things, but your own politics, you're very much left, aren't you? You're very, very much a traditional, old-school lefty who recognises that this toxic brand of identity politics is actually destructive for the left wing.
I think that's absolutely right, and I think what's been very interesting is a lot of the people I've got to know since I did this character are people on the right, because, of course, a lot of her fans are sort of are conservatives. And you know, when you actually meet people and talk to people, you realise that with political differences, you can still be a decent person, and you can disagree in a polite and sensible way. And what's happening at the moment, I think, on both sides, really.
Something a Nazi would say.
Yeah, there we go, you see. It's exactly what Hitler was all about. Yes. Hitler wanted sensible discussions, didn't he? Clearly. But I think that's the point, is that it's the extremes on both sides that just insist on mischaracterising the other side of the argument and demonising the other side of the argument, and guessing what the other people are secretly thinking. And all that nonsense, which is just infantile, you know, and I think we need to get the adults back in the room. So James. I think that's why I wanted to...
So Andrew, just on that, I mean, we are huge fans of Titania. We've been huge fans ever since she started doing this. But where does this woke thing that she comes out of come from on the left? How did the left go from being sort of, you know, somewhat sane and rational to just having this huge social justice thing going on? Is it the idea that, you know, you're wrong, you're wrong, but you're evil, that kind of thing, that the left and right sees each other? Has social media made it worse? And, you know, ultimately, what do you do so that, like, Titanias of the world aren't in power and running things on the left?
There's always been a tendency on the left to assume that people who are right-leaning are evil and diabolical rather than just misguided, whereas people on the right traditionally have seen left-wing people as just naive or stupid or whatever, which is a lot more benign. And I think that tendency on the left has just escalated to absurd proportions now. And I think what's happened, of course, all of this stems from the kind of postmodern movements in academia from the sort of the 60s and 70s, which went out of fashion for a while, but now they've seeped into the mainstream. And I have to say, and I think it should be emphasised, that a lot of people on the left are as sick of this as people on the right. It's just that they know if they speak out about it, they're going to have people dogpiling them on social media, attacking them, calling them Nazis, calling them alt-right, all of this sort of stuff. And people are just sensitive to that, and rightly so. It's not a very nice thing, is it? So I think what needs to happen is there needs to be alliances from sort of sensible, free-thinking people on all across the political spectrum to sort of unite and sort of stand up to these woke bullies, because that's what they are effectively, and they just sort of completely demonise and attack people they don't agree with in the most vicious, appalling way, and yet they claim they're doing it in the name of tolerance and compassion, which to me is funny in of itself.
Well, it is. It's always the people who preach tolerance who are the most vicious. Yeah. Now, you being a comic would know that in that world, this really oppressive censorship has come in, where comics are self-censoring, people are being cancelled for joking about something they're not supposed to joke about. And so I want to get your take on that, how this woke culture is affecting comedy.
I think the worst threat to comedy that has come out of woke culture is the self-censorship thing. You know, we've had a few examples in the UK of people being arrested well, I mean, a lot of people get arrested for offensive things they say online in the UK because we have a thing called the Electronic Communications Act, which means that the police will investigate you. There's around 3,000 arrests every year in the UK for offensive things that people have said online. And in terms of comedy, some people have been arrested, prosecuted, even gone to prison for jokes that they've posted on social media. Now, that doesn't mean to say that comedians are being censored by the state. You know, comedians, if you go to stand-up clubs, comedians will still be saying whatever they want. But there's now a heightened sense of nervousness about which areas you can explore. And what that means, of course, is that comedians are self-censoring because they want a career, you know, they want to do well. And if they say a joke that is deemed problematic by the woke identitarian left, and they get all this flack, they suddenly start thinking, is it worth it? And so they're just not going to even attempt that kind of humour. You know, if you make a mistake as a comedian, you know, and it's possible to misjudge a joke. You know, who hasn't done that? But as comedians, we have to try new stuff out, and we have to have that freedom and licence to maybe get it wrong, or maybe just joke about what the hell we want, without someone just assuming, for instance, that if you joke about homosexuality, that is therefore an anti-gay joke. Well, no, maybe it's just a joke about homosexuality, or maybe it's just a joke about homophobia. You know, people are very literal-minded in their interpretations of jokes. You know, it happens all the time now.
Andrew, how do we fight? How does the average person in the street fight this woke culture in the workplace? Is it going to die out? Will there be a reaction to it? How does one cope with it other than through humour?
You've got to be able to joke about it, but you've got to have the courage to sort of stand up and ridicule it and oppose it. And you know, I think a really good guideline is really what, I know this sounds silly, but what happened in Salem with the witch trials. Yep. Because there came a point where, you know, so many people were realising all of this is fantasy, all of this is nonsense. And, of course, before they wouldn't stand up because they get hanged for it. But there came a tipping point where there's so many people who were saying, actually, no, this isn't real, is it? That the authorities had to respond, and then it stopped, then it died out. And I think the same thing has to happen. It's about people just having the courage to say, I don't agree with this. And if more people did that, then the woke, who are always a minority, they're just a very powerful minority, they wouldn't be able to take everyone down. You know, cancel culture would become meaningless because you can't cancel everybody.
Absolutely.
So I think it's about solidarity.
Very quickly, Rita, one last question.
Well, cancel culture comes from everybody, doesn't it? Meghan Markle's mate, Jamila Jamil, who's as woke as they come, she got caught up this week and had to come out as queer. Can you tell us about that?
Oh, yeah. So that's right. She was given a job as a judge, wasn't it, on the that show Legendary, which is a sort of a voguing dance ballroom show. And, of course, people were saying, but she's not from the LGBTQIA+ community. So as though being from that community automatically qualifies you to judge a dancing competition. I wish that were the case. But it's not true. And so therefore, she said, well, I'm queer. You know, so she came out as queer. And I don't know whether that's sincere or not. You know, it might well be. But it was quite funny that they all sort of turned on her because she's one of the wokest of the woke.
Yeah.
Of course, you know, she would be one of the very people who would turn on those and cancel
the
people
revolution,
for those kind of missteps.
Andrew, the revolution eating itself. We've seen it in history time and time again. And thank you for drawing attention to Salem's Lot. Absolutely. Andrew Doyle, we'll look out for your book on Titania, and great work, and thanks for coming on Outsiders. Hope we can talk to you again. Thanks so much.
Thanks very much.